ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here and for sharing our reflection process on how to build this report on land, water and energy for inclusive and sustainable growth. This presentation will show you the joint reflections of the group debates we are having in it, and it has been prepared by Alejandro Marin, my colleague who's sitting over there from Colombia, and myself. So I would like just to explain the theoretical starting point of our reflections when we think about the relationship between natural resource use, economic growth and inclusiveness. Our starting point is that natural resources, the Earth's natural system, is the basis of our economic system, of our economic activities. We rely on the provision of resources such as water and land. We use them, and we rely on natural services for absorbing the waste which is generated by the use of natural resources, and we rely also on the capability of natural resources to regenerate themselves. What we are facing, this is sort of the ideal situation where the socio-economic system is happening within the natural system. But what we are actually facing at the currently is that the boundaries of the economic system are transgressing the boundaries of the Earth's natural system. And this is a risky situation. It risks, it puts the capacities of the natural system at risk of regenerating resources and of absorbing waste and emissions. And that's where the challenge ahead then of us is to change the workings of the socio-economic system so that our economic system is again in balance with the Earth's natural system. So that is the theoretical or conceptual approach to these fundamental relationships, but that of course does not, it lifts more questions actually than it answers, because it means how do we define these boundaries, how do we deal with them in our economic and social regulations, how do we achieve this change, this fundamental transformation. So first we should have a look back. What we know is that increasing populations and increasing wealth has always been accompanied by an increase in the use of natural resources. And this is projected to continue to be so, as Dirk Willem has quoted in the beginning there, with rising populations, with rising economic wealth. There will be more demand for food, and a different type of food. Richer people eat more meat than before, and there will be more demand for water and energy associated with that. And these are the projections of how population and GDP will behave in the next decades. These are projections by UNEP. They have developed 4 scenarios where with differences in how the relationship between the economic system and the natural system is managed. Is it managed through a market approach or through a policy approach with a view to security or sustainability first? But in all these 4 scenarios, what you can see is that the population globally will rise, the GDP will rise, and the big blue chunk you see here is the share of Asia in that, and the orange slice is the African share in those scenarios. And you can see that in those scenarios, these shares are, especially the Asian ones, are large and dominating. So what does this mean then for future use of water and land and future energy demand? This is the crucial question we will have to ask and answer in our report. So one of the answers, as Dirk Willem has said, is that the pressures over land and water are likely to increase. And this you can measure globally, but you can also measure the pressures, how the pressures will work on the interfaces between land, water, and energy. And we will hear Dr. Rahman talking about that later with an example from his country. But what we know is that that when food demand increases, it exerts pressure on expanding agricultural land. It means also that more water will be needed for agricultural purposes. The balance of land and water and energy use changes very much when you shift from crop cultivation to the production of meat. And with regard to energy, what we are having at the moment is a strong debate on focusing on strengthening renewable energy technologies, on changing the energy mix from fossil fuels to renewable energies, and this also exerts pressure obviously on land and water as the demand for biomass and biofuels is growing, as well as the interest in hydropower. At the same time, of course, this creates opportunities for growth. And this is an opportunity for increasing the inclusiveness of economic growth. But so far I have also talked a lot about increased pressures on the sustainable use of natural resources. So how do we balance these different opportunities and risks out? There are calculations at the global level, which many of you might know. There is this famous article on the planetary boundaries of economic development. And this is a calculation I took from a report written by the World Business Council of Sustainable Development, which illustrates, based on the methodology of the global ecological footprint, that if we continue to invest in growth policies as we have done in the last decades, we will face that there are not enough biological capacities for sustaining these growth paths. They have calculated that if we continue with business as usual, we would need the biological and ecological capacities of 2.3 Earths by the middle of the century. This does not mean that we will actually migrate to another Earth planet, because we unfortunately have not discovered it, and it seems not very likely to discover such an extra or additional planet. But what it means when we consume more, when our ecological footprint is beyond the limits of this planet Earth we are living on, it simply means that we are exhausting renewable energies beyond their capacity to regenerate. This is the simple meaning of that. And what they did in the exercise of the World Business Council of Sustainable Development was to ask, where do we have room for reducing our environmental consumption in order to increase the sustainability of our growth path. And this is very interesting because it shows the dark blue area you see on top refers to the carbon footprint. And that is the area where we have the largest room of maneuver for reducing the actual footprint, for reducing emissions as such. While at the lower layers, which refer to cropland, to grazing land, to forest land, there is not much possibility of expanding the use of the resource and accommodating to growth patterns, but it means there is, what it shows here is that the efficiency in using them has to be multiplied by several factors in order to accommodate it to the growing demands of wealthier and more people on Earth. So what we take from here is that the main options for changing business as usual, for making it more sustainable, lie in reducing carbon emissions, so changing the energy metrics, and at the same time increasing by many factors the efficiency with which we use cropland and grazing land and forest land. But the point here is that it's not possible to enlarge cropland at the expense of forest land, for example. And this is another graph which illustrates what is at stake when we say that we want to engage in when we want to engage in thinking on what inclusive and sustainable growth actually mean as a concept. So far, sustainability and inclusiveness have fallen apart in many. If we look at development achievements at the global scale, This picture is also from the same report from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And what it shows, the plus points are countries. And what it shows is how they do with regard to the human development index. This is on the horizontal line. So here are countries with a high human development. And on the vertical axis, you have the size of the ecological footprint which is associated with that level of human development. And what it shows you is that countries with a high human development some of them have a very high, large ecological footprint, but there is a big variation. At the same time, you also see that countries with a low level of human development also show quite a big variation in the ecological footprint associated with it. But what we can say is that countries which are within the average biocapacity available per person in 2006, this is the dotted line here, they are all poor. So at the moment we are achieving a low ecological footprint because countries are poor. This is clearly not good. And where we all would like to be, in this light blue area, with a high human development but a low ecological footprint associated with it, there is no country within that area yet. But that's where the concept of inclusive and sustainable growth would like to bring us. So this is what I want to say with this, is that it's a challenge for all countries. It's not only a challenge for developing countries, but of course there are specific challenges included in there when we think of the degree of innovation and change which is implied in this different view on development, and in this change from business as usual, the current track, to a development track which accommodates inclusiveness with sustainability. So this is the transformation we are facing, we are thinking about, and we would like to treat in a way in the report, when we look at the use of the management of land and water and energy, we would like to ask the following questions. How do we have to manage land and water in order to change tracks from business as usual to inclusive and sustainable growth with regard to the allocation and access to these resources for productive uses? And how with regard to energy, how does the use of biofuels, of biomass and hydropower fit into this picture? These are preliminary ways of formulating these questions. We're having a lot of debate in our group whether these are the right way of formulating the questions or not, in order to accommodate all the issues which are in our long title. But this is sort of a working definition of these questions, as I try to show with this how far we have got at the moment. So what do we mean when we talk about inclusive and sustainable growth? This is also not clear, really, because growth is usually measured in terms of gross domestic product, in terms of output, and there is a lot of debate on how growth should be measured in terms of also including environmental losses which are occurring in the process, and that's exactly the point of Dr. Kebiu's talk later. But what is the relationship between inclusiveness and sustainability? At the moment, we have policy communities and we have academic communities which are mostly apart from each other. Communities either focus mostly on sustainability or on inclusiveness, but there is not much dialogue between them, and often they are seen also as exclusive objectives, at least in the short term. And it's a major difficulty of balancing them, or of engaging, of envisioning a positive interaction between these two dimensions with regard to growth. It is clear that there is this trickle-down hypothesis that growth could lead to inclusiveness. This is also debated. And the relationship between sustainability and growth is also seen by many as negative, and but by others also as positive, in terms of the hypothesis that the wealthier societies are, the easier it is for them to incur the costs of environmental protection. So what I'm saying here is that these three concepts are contentious, are controversial, And these are exactly the controversies and debates we are having also in our group. So how does growth relate to well-being? Is growth a necessary element of prosperity? We heard some in the introductory remark by the local representative of the European Commission. We also heard some thoughts about that, and how to measure it. Inclusiveness, is it a cause or an effect of growth? And how do the poor participate in or benefit from growth? This is should the growth policies be shaped so that the poor benefit, and how should they be shaped so that the poor benefit from it and sustainability is not affected? Do we have concepts of weak sustainability in terms of substituting natural capital by physical capital, by human capital? Or do we adhere to a strong version of sustainability where we also recognize that there are some areas of dimensions of natural capital which cannot be substituted by human activities or by technologies, like regulating global climate, for example? And what is the time frame in which we think? Do we think in terms of 1 year? Do we think in terms of 20 years? Do we really include the long-term effects, the long-term irreversible effects of economic decisions today, of technological decisions today, on the environment, on inclusiveness, 20, 30 years from now? That is the debate at the heart of climate policy negotiations. So these debates are taking place within academic communities, within policy communities, across countries, at the global governance arenas where these issues are debated. And I think it's our effort to contribute to this debate, to shed some light on it. So when we look at sustainable growth, we agree that there are physical boundaries, that there are describable environmental tipping points which we should avoid because they lead to irreversible change. There are concepts which are being discussed by the World Bank, by the OECD. They call it either green growth or green economy. And at the heart of these concepts is the thinking on how a transition of the structures of economies towards a low carbon world can be achieved in order to avoid these irreversible changes. And instruments consider there are both price and non-price public mechanisms and public policies. The World Bank puts a strong emphasis on non-price supported public policies because they have realized that price mechanisms alone won't do the trick within the short time frame left to us in many areas. And of course, we need to think on which decisions do we take in different areas, in infrastructure, in long-lasting infrastructure, in natural resource management, and with regard to enlarging human and social and changing social capital. And where we are focusing on is natural resources, and we would like to focus there on economic and other policies, how they would need to be shaped in order to achieve sustainable growth. And one remark I would like to make here is also that the difference in this debate is that environmental limits have, for a long time, since Rio in '92, seen mostly as a constraint, as something, as a limit which limits growth. But the different way of looking at it now is also to try to see it as a driver of growth, as a driver of economic change towards sustainability. And this is quite a new way of looking at it, and this has also led to very fruitful debates in the group, and also has changed my thinking in the process in which we are now. With regard to inclusiveness, we have seen that it seems to be much more difficult for social scientists to define tipping points where social systems fall apart when a degree of inclusiveness, a certain threshold of inclusiveness is not existing anymore. We have described that for environmental tipping points, like concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, or non-sustainable degrees of land use change, freshwater use, etc. There are, this is also debated, but there are scientists who have described these tipping points at global level, and there are efforts for defining them also at local and national level. But what about defining social tipping points? We know some from the past. We know slavery is not something which really helps for having sustainable society. But I think there is a lot of room for research there. Another question is, what is the flexibility of societies to react, to change their routines, to change their ways of balancing different interests at the expense of who pays the bill? These are processes actually which are at the heart of this transformation agenda. In this respect, the EU Green Paper says that growth should not be seen as an end in itself, but as a means of poverty eradication. So in this paper, we see that economic growth is bound to a target, to a very specific target actually. It should contribute not only to enlarge the economy, but to redistribute access to income within it. And the crucial question is how this could come about in economies where this point of view is maybe not dominant. And how, as I said before, is this related to sustainability? So when we talk about inclusiveness and sustainability, it means that we're talking about targets we would like to achieve, of targets in which, for the performance of economic policies, of social policies, of environmental policies, and of targets which refer to the trade-offs or the frictions between these policy fields and their targets. So questions to be asked when we define these targets and when we make judgments, and often we make them implicitly, but it would surely be helpful to be more explicit about it. Explicit targets, like for greenhouse gas emissions, but there are also indirect links to policy changes elsewhere, like biofuels boom in several countries, which is related to biofuels demand in the EU and the US, and market forces like foreign direct investment in land. But there is also new opportunities arising. So what it means is there will be much more emphasis on policies which will emphasize or promote resource efficiency, so technological innovation. This means that growth patterns within sectors in the society will change. Resource efficient technologies and sectors will grow, others will degrow probably. And there can be quite large job creation effects associated with them. In Germany, we have experienced that renewable energies create 10 times more jobs than fossil fuel energies, because the money is spent on knowledge and persons and not on oil or gas. So this is a change agenda for the private sector. It's not necessarily a limiting agenda for the private sector. But what about innovating our social models too? So what we are seeing here is that this transformation agenda requires complex advanced stakeholder processes, because the public sector and the private sector are heterogeneous, because it requires the integration of knowledge, of academia, it requires debates with civil society, and not all of that will happen through the parliaments. Much of that will also have to happen outside parliaments at different levels, at national levels, at local levels, and compromises and solutions found will differ. What is most important for me is that we need to shift our view from the short-term effects to mid- and long-term effects in order to adequately include environmental and social effects of decisions today. We have to be much clearer about the relations between different scales, from the local to the global and vice versa. And it should have become clear now that, of course, there is no single way to achieve inclusive and sustainable growth, to improve our scorings on inclusiveness and sustainability. It will look very different in each country according to its capabilities, its resource endowment, its social and political arrangements, and its political clout also at global level. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you for